Thank you. Can you all hear us? Way back in the back? Good. So this is the setting for your next book.
Yes.
How'd you come to that?
Let me just say a word or two first about
Sure.
the book itself. And I'm told by everyone I speak to, whether it's one-on-one, a small group, or a larger group, that people cannot hear me. So I just have to ask the people at the back if they can hear me. I can see you doing this. Speak up. Okay. I am going to try and yell for the next 1.5 hours. The book called Shortcut to Enlightenment is a book I thought about writing in response to 9/11, when, after the terror attacks, after the debates on military and the like, a lot of people in the West thought we should have a dialogue with Islam. This is 2001, 2002, 2003. And I looked for a dialogue in vain. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't find a dialogue. I saw a number of priests and reverends and imams and rabbis sitting together and having a good meal where they served tea to respect the Muslims, but they weren't having a dialogue. They were avoiding the most sensitive subjects. I saw journalists debate. I saw people who were experts, mostly anthropologists and Arabists and Islamologists and so on, talk. And I had a lot of talking, and I thought, this is not what a real dialogue is. I'm going to imagine a dialogue as I wish to see it. And I figured that the most important philosopher in Islam is the founder of Islam, the Prophet Muhammad himself. And I had made remarks I think, probably at a very juvenile stage, had no media experience, and said things that were later taken out of context, but realized that's not the way to go about it. And I thought, if I can identify at least 3 themes that the West is so different from Islam and Islamic philosophy, and then have the Prophet Muhammad find individuals with whom he could have a conversation, a debate, a real dialogue, then at least I would succeed in making the point that I wanted to make, which was the philosophy of Islam is incompatible with the philosophy of liberalism. The 3 people I have found are John Stuart Mill. John wrote in 1869 an essay on the subjection of women. And I thought I would have Muhammad sit here with John Stuart Mill, and they would exchange their views on the position of women, the relationship between men and women, and their treatment. Mm-hmm. The second theme that I think that the West is very, very different in from Islam is the tension, which is universal and human, the tension between individualism on the one hand and collectivism on the other. And human societies have always had that tension and will always have that tension. But when I came to Holland, I thought Western countries had found a balance that was not perfect, but that worked for a great number of people and that continued to evolve. And I thought the best advocate of individualism that goes on to make the collective richer in every way, the best advocate I found was Frederick Hayek. So I would have Frederick Hayek sit here with Muhammad. Muhammad would, of course, defend the Ummah and Islamic collectivism. And the Prophet would defend that, and Hayek would defend individualism. And he would explain why too much emphasis on the interest of the community almost always leads to a road to serfdom. Islam means mission. Mm-hmm. The third theme that I found very interesting was the establishment of what we now have come to call open societies, liberal democracies. Best Western advocate I found, and I only came to the West in 1992, is Karl Popper. 2 volumes on the open society and its enemies. And Muhammad and Popper. And I'm told that, and I've done a little bit of research on the personality of Popper, and he seems to have been a very grouchy, man who liked to keep to himself. But we'll make an exception and have a debate with Muhammad, where Muhammad will defend the tribal society and thinks that man is lost if you cannot be loyal to kith and kin. And Popper says, ultimately, it's possible to trust the stranger if you establish institutions and a common belief that every man and every woman is free. Muhammad will wake up with two of his wives. The first one, Khadija, and the last one, Aisha. And he'll wake up right here. And the first one, Khadija, represents absolutism. She's the wife who always says yes to him and does not question him. And Aisha is the young girl whom he married when she was 6, and they consummated the marriage at 9. But she's the one who, in the history of Islam, always needled him and always asked him, oh, that kind of sounds convenient. Do you think this is the way it should be? On and on and on. Come back here in the library, and the rest you can read. I've done the first 3 chapters. Yeah. I've got 6 more chapters to go.
So I think about what a profound attack this is on Islam, and how much greater an attack it is than the cartoons, for instance, in which just little innocent, not so innocent, sketches of the Prophet cause this tremendous havoc. And in your history, you have never stopped from attacking Islam on the most basic principles. And in Submission, the movie you wrote in which the Quran is inscribed on a woman's body, these seem designed to elicit the angry reaction that Muslims predictably respond with. And do you feel like that's part of your goal, is provoking that kind of response?
I would like to replace the word attack with the word question. I grew up in Islam. I was brought a devout Muslim, and I believed it. I believed most of what we were told. It represented the difference for me between good and bad. There was one thing I wasn't allowed to do, and neither were other Muslims, and that was to question the faith. And this prohibition of questioning started psychologically. It started in your head. The minute I thought something about, I would think it's unfair. If I'm supposed to obey him, then why does the Quran say somewhere else that we are equal? That doesn't make sense. But as my thought develops, I felt guilty, and I also felt I was sinning. And if you express that to the next person, then you were told you are an infidel. And so you offended people. And I know that offense is taken because questioning is not only something you do for yourself, but the minute you express it, you are questioning other people's faiths and beliefs. And if faith, especially the Islamic faith, to many is a crutch, what you're doing is you're pulling the crutch out of their hand, and you're not replacing it with something else. Sometimes they find their way to a different crutch. Sometimes they learn to walk on their own 2 feet. But what I try to do is question, not attack. Coming to the Netherlands, attending university there, all I got schooled in was question. Everything. We would read a book like yours, and we would find it enthralling. But the professors would say, that's not enough. We want to know what you think of his theories. Are his facts accurate? Does he analyze them well? Does he get to the right conclusion? And I found in the last 15, 16 years that I have been in Europe and the United States that we are all prepared to question any author, any thinker, any philosopher, any religious leader, except Islam, Islam's icons and Islam's leaders. And yet we are, to all intents and purposes, at odds with Islam. And I think the best thing to do, and Muslims are not immune to this, is to question. But do not frame it as attack.
Okay.
And not you, I mean in general.
You had your own period of radical Islam. And I've often thought, since I've read those very arresting passages in Infidel, what if had you stayed on that path? Where would you be now?
That's a hypothetical question.
Yes.
And the hypothesis is, I just came back from Warsaw today. And I had the fortune to meet, there was a conference organized by the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the community of democracies, but they decided to focus on supporting Iran. And in between sessions, I got to speak to some of the Iranian women who were there. And they had a history like mine. They were radical believers in the revolution. They supported Ayatollah Khomeini, or their parents supported Ayatollah Khomeini. They were born and bred into it. And what those women and I share, some of them are still Muslims, some of them have become atheists, others have converted to Christianity or something else. Another girl, she said was a Buddhist. But what we all shared was disillusion. They were disillusioned with the promises made in the name of Islam. And they see it in a systemic way. They see Islam and Islamic law implemented in their own country, to their fellow women, to their sisters. And they say every man and woman in Iran is oppressed, but the system oppresses women simply because they are women. And it is the same disillusionment, and I think normally it is a disillusion that brings you off the radical path if you don't go as far as the hijackers of 9/11, where you literally give your life up for it. Now, what attracted me to radical Islam was it offered a very simple moral framework between good and bad. I was required only to submit to that framework. It gave me a sense of purpose. And it divided the world into us who are good, so there's that group feeling, and those who are not yet Muslims and who have to be Islamized, or who are the enemies. And with that comes not only a sense of purpose, but a great and deep sense of belonging.
You miss that?
I have to confess I do. But knowing that, having gone through that pain of that disillusion, I think I can live with the moments of loneliness that freedom and living in freedom takes me through, knowing that the grass is not really greener on the other side. And today there are enough examples in the name of Islam where the grass is not so green.
Well, speaking of women and Muslims, it's really striking. Khalid Abu al-Fadl is a distinguished scholar of Islamic law, and he counts in the history of Islam 2,500 women who were notable imams, narrators of hadith, and poets. Today he says there are none. So what happened to the woman in Islam? Where is she now? And why is her voice so quiet?
If you analyze such human achievements as poetry, it's about love and romance. Islam does not give men and women, but especially women, the permission to be individuals, to fall in love and imagine what it is to be that kind of romance. Storytelling. Most of the novels I read today, and I've been reading Western novels, are about criticizing their own society. Islam does not allow or accept criticism. Imagining figures as outsiders who look on the inside, but then speak out from the inside. agents of Islam know that that hollows the system completely. That is what leads to revolutions. There are women born into Islam who are talented poets, who are talented writers even today, talented storytellers, capable of the deepest set of emotions, but they cannot express it. If they do, the consequences are too high, the price is too high. Still, you see in places like Iran, Sudan recently, with a pair of trousers, even Saudi Arabia, you introduced me to a young woman who decided not to be a part of that, and in her own way is protesting. So I don't belong to the category of people who say it is possible to snuff out, to stifle the human imagination. Islam is a very, very, very difficult, if applied, it's very difficult, and the obstacles it puts in the way of individual freedom are great. But still, it cannot snuff out life. It cannot snuff out the imagination. And for me, radical Islam is it's just a matter of time before it goes like Nazism and communism and all of these isms. Before it goes into, I don't know who the quote is from, but the trash can of history.
But I think the point that Abu Afadl was making is that Islam has changed with regard to women in terms of allowing them. You even mentioned Aisha, the Prophet's wife, who had a role and who actually taught others. And Khadija, who had a business, who operated the camel supply. You know, I mean, this was a period of, in Islam's own origins, women had a more prominent role than they seem to have today. And it seems to have decreased over time. And what stuns me about your story is I know so many Muslim women who have, your story is not unique. You know, many Muslim women have endured great sense of oppression. And it's not surprising to me that that kind of behavior would stir up a furious response, as you have given voice to. But it's such a singular voice. That's why I wonder why there are not more of you.
Well, first let me start by defining Islam as a set of beliefs as opposed to a genetic makeup of a people. It is not genetic to be Muslim. If you were born to a different set of parents in Rome or in the Aborigines, you'd be something else. You would believe in a different set of moral framework. So to be Arab is not necessarily to be Muslim. To be born in Pakistan or in Somalia doesn't necessarily mean that you are born with a DNA that says you have to be and you are Islam and you can evolve on. That's one thing. It's good to keep this distinction in mind because when some of the people who disagree with me and are defending Islam, they bring the story of Khadija, the first wife of Muhammad, as being a caravan leader, a merchant, an entrepreneur in her own right. Remember, she was operating in the pre-Islamic period. When Muhammad married her, I think she was about 40 years old, which at the time was very old. And he was much younger. So that is before he founded Islam. Once Islam was established as a political framework, I don't want to talk of it as a nation state yet, because state formation is something that I would say is really typically Western. But when Islam as commands from God and organizing the social order, when those two were put together, the first thing that was established was that women needed a male guardian. That is not only in the Quran and in the Hadith, but anywhere where Sharia or Islamic law is established, women need a male guardian. Now, if you are lucky, and some women are lucky, their male guardian, their father, born in different circumstances, would send them to school, would send them to colleges. They can take. But most often, we see that male guardians don't do that. And the male guardians, as required by Sharia today, in the 21st century, 1400 years after Islam was founded, do not give women permission to own their own bodies, to complete schools, to think, and to become their own persons. They're afraid of female sexuality. So there is, and I hear it, there are women who tell me, I pray to the same God who gives my husband permission to beat me, but what else do I have? And sometimes I just think we should offer them another God. Because I can do without a God, but if most people can't, then maybe the competition would be just offer a God of love, or offer a God of entrepreneur, something like that. But my response to that is I'm not convinced by people who say Islam has changed. I would be convinced if two things were to happen. If the Prophet Muhammad were to be declared fallible, and I think in the Catholic evolution, the Pope has come to be considered to be fallible, maybe not formally, but informally, then Muhammad would no longer be the lawgiver. And I think there are organized attempts in Turkey to do this, to declare Sharia, or the example of the body of Hadith, to declare that redundant and historic. A second thing would be to take off the read-only lock on the Quran. Right now, you cannot argue with the Quran. It's God's word. You can't change a letter. All you have to do is obey it. If the Quran were to gain a status like that of the Bible, then the road to separating religion from power, that road would open up, and then Islam would be reformed. And right now, beyond Irshad Manji and a few Turkish scholars, I haven't seen any attempt that is as organized, as powerful, as well-resourced as the radicals.
I've often thought that, in Mecca, it used to be that the four schools of Islam were taught openly and freely. And now only the Wahhabi trend is permitted. And just that one change alone to allow Islam to become diverse rather than increasingly Wahhabized would open up that religion to become more tolerant.
That is, I would say, that is the old way of thinking about Islam. Islam can and only will change only, forget about changing Islam. Muslims will change, will develop and evolve and modernize in Mecca or in Muslim countries. That is the old way of thinking. Why is that the old way of thinking? Because today there are about 15 to 20 million Muslims living in Western countries that are already modern. You don't have to go to Mecca and read the four schools of thought and go through that in Wahhabism and that kind of nonsense. And if you look at any, and I don't know how polls in Muslim countries are reliable, because for a poll, for an opinion to be valid, you have to be free and you have to be informed. But there are now so many Gallup polls, Pew polls, journalists, so many reports saying that there are more Muslims who would like to move to the West, to have a green card or immigrate to Europe. And given that reality, I just wouldn't wait for Mecca. It's just a question of, why?
Actually, this reminds me of a joke. I'm sorry.
Tell a joke. Sorry.
When I spent a lot of time in Egypt, and it's the capital, the joke capital of the Middle East. And you can't, a day without a good joke in Egypt is a terrible day. But just across the Red Sea in Saudi Arabia. I spent the first time 3 months there. And when I left, I thought, I hadn't heard a single joke. Not one joke, and it's just not that far away, you know. So the next time I went, I asked, you know, do you guys tell jokes? And, oh yeah, we tell jokes all the time. We're very funny. And tell me like a really good Saudi joke. And, you know, a lot of silence. So finally I got the Saudi joke. I'm sorry, I had to do this. And it is a Somali and an Egyptian and a Saudi are asked, what is your opinion of eating meat? And the Somali says, what is eating? And the Egyptian says, what is meat? And the Saudi says, what's an opinion? Now that we're in the lighter part of the program, when I talk to people about you, you know, the different ways that they identify you and identify with you, you are black, you are African, you're a woman, you're atheist, you're conservative from the American perspective, and you're really beautiful. Those are the responses I get. How do you identify yourself? Which of those things do you feel is most characteristic of who you are when you wake up in the morning and you think about what's important to you? What part of your identity is governing it?
I promise you, I never wake up in the morning thinking, gosh, what am I, an African? And golly, what am I, a conservative? And I don't. I wake up in the morning thinking, how will I make these trips through the day? I wanted to pack this and forgot to pack it. It's really very mundane. And this is what, even though a life may seem interesting and romantic and great out there, you still have to go through this daily stuff. I think identity, mine, yours, is not static and is not one-dimensional. I do feel I am a woman. I can't change that. I'm 1.72 meters. That's a given. But intellectually, I know that I'm evolving. And the reason why I don't want to call myself a conservative is I don't have a set of given truths anymore. I have my values, and I think the value of freedom is absolute. The value of life is absolute. I don't have anything else that's absolute beyond that. Everything else is just a question seeking and questioning.
Well, I think about when you were a child in Somalia, and your identity was formed by being a girl, that you pretty much established who you were in your society. And then you moved out of that society, and you came to Europe. And you were a black African. That seems like it would have been much more powerful than in that context, that you were defined much more that way. Now you're in America, and those qualities are probably shaded a little differently. So how is it different?
It's different in that you have accumulated experience. Coming out of Africa and coming to Europe, I didn't identify myself as an African because everybody in Africa was an African.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I'm born in '69, which is after decolonization, so everyone around me was black, the same color, and it was always, I went to Muslim Girls Secondary School in Nairobi, and if we went to town, the center, that's where you saw white people, and they were tourists. They were carrying cameras around, and they were surrounded by a group of young men who offered them wares that we didn't want to buy, but they seemed to want to buy large wooden masks. And so that was one stereotype of the white man. That's what you saw. But when you went to, in school, you got to read books. You went to the movies. you saw a different dimension of what being white was, and it always represented having these wonderful adventures that we didn't have, either because we were not allowed to or because we didn't have enough money to have those adventures. Now, coming to Holland, coming to Germany, for the first time, I saw large numbers of white people. And it was in the summer, and they were largely pink. And that's when you think, oh God, I stick out. I'm different. But at the time, my first experience in Holland was one of politeness. I was welcomed. I was put in a place called an asylum seeker center, and I was treated so well. The first man in uniform I saw asked if he could get me a cup of coffee. So my accumulated experience from Africa was people in uniform, people who represent the state, repress you, they rape you, they take things away from you, they don't give you. And here I was confronted with a society that looked different, but that also acted different, that were kind and generous and obsessed with values such as equality and freedom. In the Netherlands, more about equality. In the United States, more about freedom. So with that experience, with what I read, with what the debates that are going on, I now feel like I'm a complete member, even though you are quite pink here tonight. But in general, I don't feel... I always ask myself, if I were to take a plane now and go to Nairobi and go and live in the neighborhood that I grew up in, those neighborhoods that I grew up in, would I be a happier person? And my answer is, no, I would not be a happier person. And as long as that is the case, I think I will, I will probably not complain so much about being different.
You know, one more question. You lived in Kenya for a while, which is President Obama's father's roots. And I wonder what you think about Obama, and also how you reacted to his overture to the Muslim world in June.
I think Obama, first time I saw him and heard him, I thought, first of all, I thought he was incredibly handsome. And then I thought he is capable, well-educated, well-established, ran a wonderful campaign. I first took him seriously after his speech in Iowa when he defeated Hillary Clinton. And I took him seriously not only because who he was and what he was saying, but because of the reaction of the American people to him. And I thought it said more about the American people and their history than Obama. I followed the elections here in New York, and I remember young people running at me and clutching me and saying, "Are you not excited? We're going to have a black president. Are you too excited about the prospect of a black president?" And I would go, "I don't know, I've only known black presidents." I'm not going to be excited about a politician just because of his color, which, by the way, is in a way, I know it is coming to terms with the history of this country, but in a way, assuming that someone, because she's a woman, someone because he's black, someone because he's young, is going to be a good and accomplished leader, that assumption is wrong in my view. My reaction to his speech in the Arab world, I was asked by a German paper, Allgemeine Zeitung, or Frankfurt, Die Zeit, very liberal according to American terms. In Europe, we call them very left-wing. They asked me to write a response, and my response is posted in the Huffington Post. I thought he should have been more truthful. I mean, he did a good job. He's a good speaker. We know that now. But I thought he could have been more honest about the three things that were first published in 2002 by the Arab Human Development Report. That was the lack of freedom. It was the subjection of women to a degree Westerners can never understand, and I think will never understand. You just don't know that. Even in the worst, blackest days for women in the West, in history, it's never been as bad as it is in Saudi Arabia. You've seen that in Afghanistan, even in places like Egypt, even in places like Morocco. So he should have spoken about those two, and he should have spoken about, so it was women's rights, it was the lack of freedom, and it was the knowledge deficit. My piece is he should have brought them Kindles. He took Queen Elizabeth an iPod, and I thought, wow, what if he had taken Kindles full of information, and I would give him a reading list, and he would hand them out. But those were the three things that I hoped he would speak about. That was from an intellectual perspective. From a political perspective, of course, I understood that Obama had to make a statement that he was different from George Bush, that he was going to follow a different course, and he was going to say, I'm not going to confront you, but I'm going to invite you to come on board. And history will tell us whether they will accept that invitation or not.
Ask for some questions now from the audience. I see you got your hand up very first, so please.
But as you've said that, the rest of our conversation has been really about how strong Islam is, and we've all seen it from what has gone on in Iran. So from our perspective, I don't see an end to Islam very quickly. And I was wondering how you came to that opinion that Islam would eventually go the way of Nazism. Will we in this room be alive to see that?
Yeah, I don't want to pin myself down on a time frame, but if you look at a country like Saudi Arabia, it was born and Islamic Sharia or the Quran as a constitution was introduced. So we don't know what the Saudis would do different if they had a new chance today. What we do know is Iran. In the 1960s, 1970s, the Iranian people were very displeased with the Shah. They were displeased with the government and the way they had organized their social order. A young man, Khomeini, comes around and makes an effort, which I think you document very well in the Looming Tower, how those different minds started to look toward Islam as the solution to social and political problems. And Ayatollah Khomeini, study him. He was a charismatic guy, well-spoken, appealed to, you would say, I mean, he was much more charismatic in a sense than Hitler. But what he did was he convinced the Iranians that if they went with him, things would change. And so for the first time, we have a country, a nation that freely chose radical Islam as their political social order, have lived through it, are disillusioned, and want change. If that happens, if we do nothing, and that happens to all the radical Muslim movements, Hamas comes to government and nothing of what they promised is achieved. In fact, things have gone worse for that region. Hezbollah have been active for a long time. And if there were elections, they probably would win in Syria, or they would make large gains. The Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, if there were elections today, might really likely be the next government. And I haven't formed an opinion on this yet, but one of the things that we observe is when people make a choice and they live through it and they come out of it better informed, the likelihood of them going back is almost zero. I've read accounts of people in Iraq who were very sympathetic to the radical Islamists. But when they saw what they were doing, cutting people's fingers off for smoking, beheadings, just really atrocious, inhuman things in the name of Islam, most people were not only repulsed by the acts, but they were repulsed by Islam itself. And given that kind of ruthless cruelty, given the corruption that comes with them, the inefficiency, and I think at one point there is going to be not only the critical thinking, but competition from the outside world, the lifespan of Islam is not going to be another 1,400 years. But I can't tell you if it's going to be another 50 or another 100.
This lady right here.
I was struck by the fact that when you spoke about your identity, you said identity is not static, it evolves. And yet it seems to me in your representation of Islam, you present a very static view of Islam rather than an evolutionary or a dynamic one, because there are, in fact, not only multiple and contradictory texts, as you yourself point out, but there are, in fact, Islams. You yourself this evening have spoken of Islam and radical Islam, and they are not the same. And it seems to me also there are contextual differences related to histories and politics and so forth. And I'm wondering why, how should I put it, you're invested in a kind of rigid view of Islam as opposed to looking for the cracks and the contradictions which suggest possibilities of openness and reform, not the least reason for which is the Muslim diaspora going on in the world.
Well, yes and no. I think I have explained sufficiently, would like to do one more time, that Islam, for it to be reformed, the Prophet Muhammad and his status as an infallible leader whose example can only be followed, that once that is changed, and I have not seen an organization, except minorities like the Aga Khan's followers, the Ahmadiyyas, the Baha'is, who made attempts to introduce a new prophet or a new leader or to modernize that, and are considered to be heretics. But aside from these minorities who are completely marginalized, I have not yet seen an organization that says we need to review the Prophet Muhammad as a moral guide. The read-only lock on the Quran, I see attempts by different individuals saying, well, let's interpret it differently. But I haven't seen them give permission for it to be a historic book. There's no movement that is doing that. By a movement, I mean, and I want to compare the tension within Islam. If you take an organization like Al-Qaeda, an organization like Jama'at al-Islamiyya, or the Muslim Brotherhood, if you take all of these organizations, what you see is a conviction. You see resources. You see agents. It's not just, there is no but, yes, here, there. It is a proper activist movement. When I see that, when I see a group of Muslims, instead of trying to polish the image of Islam or defend the image of Islam, when I see them go out and say, this is what we need to do, organize a synod of their own, a church of their own, if you would like. When I see that in the same force and the same passion, then I'm going to obviously say the facts have changed and Islam can be reformed and will be reformed. On the other hand, why wait for it? Do you think that it's impossible for Muslims to adopt liberal views, scientific inquiry? I mean, we have seen lots of Muslims convert to Christianity. I have Muslim friends who are liberals, conservatives. The marketplace of ideas is now open to Muslims too, in a way that it hasn't been open in the past. So the assumption that Islam or Muslims can change their lives only through Islam, That, I think, is the rigid assumption. That is what we need to get rid of and offer the ideas and the values of freedom to everyone, everyone. And that starts by not attacking, but by questioning the basic tenets, the logic of Islam.
I read yesterday about a 12-year-old girl who died in childbirth, a Muslim girl. She was betrothed at age 6 and married at age 9. What can Western women do practically?
Western women can do different things on different levels. I think one thing I would do when I look at the Western women's movement was Western women were able to articulate the logic behind the systemic oppression of the women here. Muslim women today need help in articulating what those principles of oppression are. Western women were able to organize and, in a way, manage the differences within. There were differences. There were women who wanted to be more activists. There were women who wanted to cooperate. And it seems as if for Muslim women, because of their circumstances, you just get exhausted. You know, it is, you can't be an activist all your life. And the organizing, if you look at the 1900s, 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, sometimes it looks as if we're going backward, as if we're turning the clock. I mean, Egypt was more modern in the 60s than it is. Yeah. There's that kind of, and that has to do with leaving the principle out. People address, Western women address the poverty. They say, give them education, this and that, but they don't make the link. And once the link between the principles, you know, this is what the Quran says, this is Sharia law. So next time when someone comes around and says, let's introduce Sharia law, women should be intellectually strong enough and articulate enough to say, we know when Sharia is introduced where that will take us.
Well,
that's yeah.
I've been ordered to bring this to a close, but I want to say one thing that I think that has made the most profound change in the Muslim world is the model that we had of this really profound election, that our actions spoke in a way, and these kinds of things, having this great institution here, having a place of learning, those kinds of things are the things that really make the difference in the rest of the world. They see how it works, and this is, I think, a fine example of the kind of civil society that will be the cure. And I want to pay tribute to Ayaan. I just think it's wonderful that you were able to be here with us and share your thoughts tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Ayaan, and thank you, Lawrence. One of the remarkable things is that for Ayaan, it's 3:40 in the morning, her body time. She had a long trip back from Warsaw via London. We were worried that she might not make it, but she did splendidly and brilliantly. Thank you so much. I'd like to say thank you to a few other people. First of all, to the 3 co-chairs of the President's Council who organize these events so diligently and so perfectly. So Louise Winwald, Gayford Steinberg, and Alice Tisch, thank you. David Mann, as always, makes our dinners very, very beautiful at very, very low cost. David, thank you. Rhonda Sherman of The New Yorker, who asked the last question, and Paul Holdengraber, who is so extraordinary in directing the Live at the New York Public Library program, were really very, very helpful in organizing tonight's program and working with the co-chairs. So thanks to both of you as well. And now you see, if you needed any proof, what this library is all about. It's about serving people. It's about bringing the most brilliant writers and the most creative minds into our buildings, into our collections, so that they can create new interpretations of the world, of history, of religion, of thought, new critical approaches to problems of today, write brilliant books, and then come and meet with people like us to talk about them. So it's a great place, and you are really, truly wonderful to have been here tonight for us. Thank you very, very much, and thank all of you.